They told the court I was losing my mind. My own son and his wife used my grief as a weapon, got power of attorney, and threw me in the cheapest, saddest nursing home in Philadelphia. They started draining my pension thinking they were set for life. They forgot one thing. My late husband didn't just teach me how to grieve, he spent 40 years teaching me how to trade stocks. They thought they were liquidating my assets. They had no idea I was about to liquidate theirs. Hello, my friends. Thank you for being here with me today. If you believe that a sharp mind is the greatest asset and that underestimating a quiet woman is a fool's game, then you have found your people. It means so much to me to know where you're listening from, so please say hello in the comments. Your strength is my strength. Now let me tell you what they did to me and what I did about it. My name is Esther Mae Washington, and for the first 77 years of my life, my world was one of quiet order. For 40 of those years I was the head librarian at Overbrook High School in Philadelphia. My days were governed by the gentle rustle of turning pages and the satisfying thud of a date stamp on a checkout card. My evenings were governed by the steady, comforting presence of my husband, Samuel. Our home, a neat as-a-pin row house in West Philly, was our sanctuary, a place of deep peace and shared rituals. But a year ago, Samuel passed, and the silence he left behind was a physical entity. A thick, suffocating fog that muted the colors of my life and made every simple task feel like a monumental effort. Grief, I learned, is not a clean, sharp pain. It is a thief. It steals your appetite, your sleep, your focus. It makes you forget things like whether you've paid the gas bill or watered the ferns. It makes you sit and stare at a wall for an hour, lost in a sea of memory. My son Kevin and his wife Brenda saw this fog of grief not as a wound to be tended, but as an opportunity to be exploited. They began to visit more often, their faces masks of strained concern. They'd exchange worried glances when I couldn't find my reading glasses or when I'd start to tell a story about Samuel and trail off, my voice thick with unshed tears. They weren't seeing a grieving widow, they were gathering evidence. The ambush came on a Tuesday. They arrived unannounced, Brenda carrying a stack of glossy brochures, Kevin holding a thick leather portfolio. "Mom," Kevin began, his voice oozing a practiced, gentle tone he must have learned from his sales training. "We're worried about you. This big house all by yourself, it's too much." Brenda laid the brochures on the coffee table. They were for nursing homes, each one looking more depressing than the last. The pictures were faded, the smiles of the residents forced. "We found a few places," she said, her voice bright and brittle. "Safe, secure places where you won't have to worry about a thing." I stared at them, my mind struggling to catch up. Worry about what? This is my home. "But you're not coping, Mom," Kevin pressed, his voice hardening slightly. "You forgot to pay the electric bill last month. You almost missed a doctor's appointment. You're not safe here." He opened his portfolio. Inside was a stack of legal documents, bristling with tabs and signature lines. "This is a power of attorney," he said, sliding it in front of me. "It's just a formality. It allows me to help you manage your finances, to pay your bills from your pension, to make sure everything is taken care of. So you don't have to worry." They talked for over an hour, a relentless two-pronged assault of feigned concern and veiled threats. They spoke of my cognitive decline, my vulnerability. They used my love for Samuel as a weapon, saying he wouldn't want to see me struggling like this. The fog of grief was so thick, their words so confusing and insistent, that I felt my own judgment begin to dissolve. I was tired. I was so profoundly tired of the silence and the sadness. Maybe they were right. Maybe I couldn't do it on my own anymore. With a trembling hand, I signed the papers. I signed away my home, my finances, my independence. I signed away my life. A week later, they moved me into the Golden Years Care Facility, a place whose name was the cruelest of jokes. My life's possessions were reduced to what could fit in a single battered suitcase. As I sat on the lumpy mattress in my new sterile room that first night, the fog of grief finally began to clear, replaced by the cold, sharp shock of reality. And in that clarity, a memory of Samuel surfaced, as vivid as if he were sitting right there beside me. It wasn't a memory of his final, painful days, but of our life, our ritual. Every evening for 40 years after the dinner dishes were cleared, we would sit at our kitchen table. I would have my library books and he would lay out the Wall Street Journal. He was a master plumber, a proud union man, but his secret passion was the stock market. "Essie," He'd say, tapping the stock listings with his finger. A pension is fine, Social Security is fine. But a woman needs to have her own pot, a pot nobody knows about but her. A pot she can grow herself. He was deeply skeptical of financial advisors. Never let a man in a fancy suit tell you what to do with your money, he'd lecture. They're just salesmen. You have to understand it yourself. And so he taught me. He taught me about P/E ratios and dividend yields, about blue chips and market caps. He taught me to be patient, to ignore the hype, to invest in solid, boring companies that made things people needed every day. He made me read annual reports, underlining key phrases. He called me his chief financial officer. He respected my mind, my meticulous librarian's attention to detail. They can take your house, they can take your car, was his favorite saying, but they can never take what's in your head. That's the only real vault, baby. Lying in that sterile room, the smell of disinfectant burning my nostrils, I realized my son had seized control of my bank accounts and my pension. But he had forgotten about the vault. He had forgotten what his father had spent a lifetime putting inside my head. The Golden Years Care Facility was not a place for living. It was a place for waiting. Waiting for meals, waiting for medication, waiting for the slow, inevitable end. The air hung thick with the cloying scent of industrial-strength cleaner, failing to mask the underlying smell of despair and decay. The walls were painted a pale, institutional yellow, the color of old bruises. The floors were scuffed linoleum, and the fluorescent lights in the hallways hummed with a constant nerve-grinding buzz. My room was a small, beige box with a window that overlooked a gravel parking lot and a dumpster. My roommate was a woman named Mildred who communicated only in moans, her mind long since vanished into the fog of dementia. This was the safe, secure place my son and his wife had chosen for me. I soon learned why. It was the cheapest facility within a 50-mile radius that would accept a new resident on such short notice. Kevin and Brenda visited once, the week after I moved in. They brought a potted plant that was already wilting and stayed for a stilted, awkward 10 minutes. "See, Mom," Kevin said, gesturing around the grim common room as if it were a resort lobby. "Isn't this better? No more worries." Brenda didn't say much. She just took a lot of pictures on her phone, careful to frame them so you couldn't see the peeling paint or the stained ceiling tiles. A few days later, I understood the purpose of those photos. A young, kind-hearted nursing assistant named Maria, who sometimes took pity on me and would sneak me an extra cup of tea, showed me her phone. "Your daughter-in-law posts about you all the time," she said, her voice soft with sympathy. She showed me Brenda's social media page. There was a picture of me taken during their visit with a caption that read, "Moved my wonderful mother-in-law into her new home today. So important to make sure our elders are safe and cared for. #family first, #blessed." The post had hundreds of likes. The comments were all praises for what a wonderful, caring daughter-in-law she was. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The reality was that my pension, the money I had earned over 40 years of dedicated service, was being systematically plundered. Every month, my full pension check was direct deposited into my bank account, the one Kevin now controlled. And every month, I would see the evidence of their spending spree on Brenda's page. There was a post from a fancy resort in Cancun, a much-needed getaway. So important to recharge your batteries. #self-care. There was a picture of a new, oversized SUV in their driveway. Our new baby. Finally have enough room for the whole family. #upgrade. There were photos of expensive dinners, designer handbags, a new deck being built on the back of their house. They were living a life of luxury on my dime while I was eating lukewarm, gelatinous Salisbury steak and sleeping on a mattress as thin as a prayer. The initial shock of my circumstances gave way to a cold, simmering rage. But rage, as Samuel used to say, is a hot fire that burns you out. Anger needs to be cooled, shaped, and aimed. I was a librarian. My strength was not in shouting, but in observing, in gathering information, in understanding the system. I began to study the Golden Years facility as if it were a complex text. I learned the staff schedules, who was diligent and who was lazy, who was kind and who was cruel. I learned that the head administrator was a man named Mr. Henderson, a person who was rarely seen and universally feared by the staff. I learned that the heart of the facility was not the administrator's office, but the underpaid, overworked nursing assistants like Maria, who ran the place on a shoestring budget of compassion. My only escape, my only solace, was the activity room. It was a sad, neglected space with a few mismatched chairs, a wobbly card table, and a shelf of tattered large-print romance novels. But in the corner, covered in a thin film of dust, was a treasure. It was an old beige desktop computer, a relic from at least a decade ago, but it was plugged in and, according to Maria, it connected to the internet, albeit at a snail's pace. The residents rarely used it. Most couldn't see the screen well and the others had no interest. But I saw it for what it was. It was not a computer. It was an escape hatch. It was a weapon. It was the key to the only vault they hadn't been able to touch. Accessing the computer became my singular focus, a strategic campaign I planned with the meticulousness of a librarian organizing a new collection. I couldn't just sit down and start using it. That would draw suspicion. In a place where any deviation from the norm was noted, I had to create a narrative. I had to become the quiet, harmless old woman who had taken up a new hobby to keep her mind sharp. My target was Maria, the young nursing assistant with the kind eyes. I started by engaging her in small talk, asking about her family, her studies. She was taking night classes to become a registered nurse. I learned she was saving for a down payment on a car, that she loved a certain brand of coffee they didn't have in the staff room. I began to build a quiet alliance, a relationship based on mutual respect in a place where there was precious little of it. After a few weeks I made my move. "Maria," I said one afternoon as she was helping me with my medication, "I was a librarian for 40 years. My mind, it needs exercise or it will turn to mush like this pudding." I gestured at the sad beige dessert on my tray. "I see you have a computer in the activity room. Would it be too much trouble if I were to use it sometimes? To do puzzles, perhaps? Crosswords, things like that?" She smiled, a genuine warm smile. "Of course, Mrs. Washington. Nobody ever uses it. It would be good for you." The first time I sat down at that old desktop, my heart hammered against my ribs. The machine whirred to life with a groan, the screen flickering before settling on a dated operating system. The internet connection was, as Maria had warned, painfully slow. Each click was followed by a long, agonizing pause. But when the search engine finally loaded, I felt a jolt of triumph. I was no longer just a resident of room 2B. I was connected to the world. I spent the first few sessions establishing my cover story, ostentatiously navigating to websites for online checkers and Sudoku. But when I was sure no one was watching, my fingers, guided by a muscle memory I thought I had lost, typed in the name of a small independent brokerage firm, Vanguard Investments. It was an account Samuel had opened for me 30 years ago. He had called it my Mad Money account, my running away fund. He had funded it with a single $5,000 deposit, money he had won in a poker game with his union buddies. "This is yours, Essie," he had told me, handing me the paperwork. "Not ours. Yours. I'll never ask you what you do with it. It's for you to practice with, to learn the ropes without risking our real nest egg." Over the years I had made a few small trades, but mostly I had let it sit, a forgotten relic of Samuel's lessons. It was so insignificant, so separate from our main accounts, that I was certain Kevin and Brenda had no idea it existed. It was a digital needle in a financial haystack. My hands trembled as I went through the forgot password process, answering security questions about my mother's maiden name and my first pet. And then I was in. The screen loaded and I saw the number. After 3 decades of dividends being reinvested and the market's slow, steady climb, the initial $5,000 had grown to just over $22,000. It wasn't a fortune, but to a woman whose every penny was being stolen, it felt like the treasury of a king. A wave of emotion washed over me, so powerful it almost made me gasp. It was grief and love and gratitude, all tangled together. Samuel, my wise, wonderful Samuel. Even from beyond the grave, he was still taking care of me. He had given me the tools, and now he had given me the seed capital. I took a deep, steadying breath. The time for emotion was over. It was time for work. I remembered Samuel's first rule: don't get sentimental. The market doesn't care about your feelings. It only cares about numbers and patterns. I opened another browser tab and began my research, just as we had done every night at our kitchen table. I looked at the market indexes, the sector reports, the financial news. The world had changed. News was instantaneous, trading was electronic. But the fundamentals, I realized, were the same. Companies still made things, people still bought things, and good, solid businesses still paid dividends. My mind, which had felt so foggy and slow with grief, began to clear. The librarian in me took over. I was no longer a sad old woman in a nursing home. I was an analyst, a researcher, a strategist. The stock ticker was my new card catalog. The financial reports were my new reference section. I spent 2 hours that first day just reading, absorbing, letting the rhythm of the market seep back into my bones. Before I logged off, I made my first trade in over a decade. I sold off a small, underperforming tech stock that had been in the portfolio for years, and with the proceeds, I bought 20 shares of a boring, reliable utility company that had just announced a dividend increase. It was a classic Samuel Washington move. Safe, smart, and utterly unexciting. And as I clicked the confirm trade button, I felt a flicker of the old fire. Esther Mae Washington was back in business. My weekly sessions at the dusty computer in the activity room became the organizing principle of my life. I lived for those few hours of quiet, focused intensity. The slow, methodical work of research and trading was an antidote to the chaotic helplessness of my daily existence. While my body was confined to the beige walls of the Golden Years facility, my mind was soaring through a world of balance sheets, earnings reports, and market trends. I was no longer just a resident. I was the secret CEO of Room 2B, managing a portfolio that was growing with astonishing speed. I stuck to Samuel's rules as if they were scripture. Buy what you know, Essie, he used to say. So I invested in the companies whose products I saw around me every day. The company that made the soap in the dispenser, the one that manufactured the cheap, durable wheelchairs, the massive pharmaceutical firm that supplied the residents endless medications. I bought shares in the processed food conglomerate that delivered our bland, tasteless meals, and the utility company that kept the fluorescent lights humming. I was, in a way, investing in my own prison, turning the instruments of my confinement into the tools of my liberation. My patience, a skill honed by 40 years of librarianship, was my greatest asset. I didn't chase hot stocks or listen to the breathless hype of the television pundits I sometimes caught glimpses of in the common room. I bought solid, undervalued companies and held them. I collected their dividends, and when the time was right, I sold and took my profits. My initial $22,000 grew to 30, then 50, then 100,000. The numbers on the screen were a secret joy, a private rebellion unfolding in plain sight. With my growing wealth, I began to wage a quiet campaign of kindness within the facility. I saw how the overworked nursing assistants, especially Maria, struggled with the ancient, sputtering coffee machine in the staff lounge. One week, after a particularly successful trade on a pharmaceutical stock, I withdrew $200 in cash from my brokerage account, a feature I was delighted to discover, and gave it to Maria. "For you and the other girls," I said, pressing the bills into her hand. "For all you do. Maybe you can get a new coffee maker." Maria's eyes filled with tears. The next day, a shiny new Keurig machine sat in the staff lounge, and the morale of the entire floor lifted perceptibly. I used my profits to make other small, anonymous improvements. I noticed the residents in the common room were always bickering over the few available channels on the basic cable package. I went online and, using a prepaid debit card I had the brokerage firm mail to a post office box I'd set up, I anonymously upgraded the facility's subscription to a premium package with hundreds of channels and a movie library. Suddenly, there was peace in the common room. The men could watch their sports, the women their soap operas. It was a small thing, but in a place where dignity was in such short supply, it was a miracle. I became a silent, secret benefactor, a ghost in the machine, using the profits of my intellect to sow small seeds of comfort and joy in a barren landscape. Meanwhile, my son was on a very different financial journey. Emboldened by the seemingly endless river of my pension money, Kevin quit his sales job. "I'm going to be a day trader, Mom," he announced on one of his rare, perfunctory phone calls. "It's where the real money is. No more bosses for me." I could hear the arrogance and ignorance in his voice. Samuel had always warned me about people like that. "The market loves to humble a proud man, Essie," he'd say. "It chews up amateurs who think it's a casino." Brenda's social media became a chronicle of Kevin's folly. He was trading on margin, using borrowed money to make reckless bets on volatile meme stocks and cryptocurrency. There were pictures of his new multi-monitor trading setup in their spare bedroom, with captions like, "My new corner office." #BossLife, #to the moon. These were followed by vague, frustrated posts about market manipulation and bad luck. whenever his bets went sour. He was gambling, not investing. He was driven by greed and emotion, the two cardinal sins in Samuel's investing Bible. While I was slowly and patiently building a fortress of wealth, my son was gleefully dynamiting its foundations, using my own money as the explosive. The irony was as bitter as the nursing home coffee. He thought he was the master of his own destiny, the wolf of suburban Philadelphia. He had no idea that a quiet, patient lioness was watching from a cage of his own making, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was doing my weekly review of my portfolio, the numbers on the screen glowing like friendly constellations in the dim light of the activity room. A series of smart investments in the healthcare sector, companies I had researched meticulously, had paid off spectacularly. My account balance, the secret pot of gold Samuel had willed into existence, had just crossed the $250,000 mark. The number shimmered on the screen, $251,427.18. It was more than just money. It was power. It was freedom. It was enough. For months I had been a passive resistor, a secret benefactor. I had used my skills to make my own life and the lives of those around me a little more bearable. But I was still a prisoner. Kevin and Brenda were still bleeding my pension dry, living their lavish life on the fruits of my labor while I languished in this beige purgatory. The time for quiet rebellion was over. The time for a hostile takeover had begun. My mind, now clear and sharp, went to work. I needed a weapon, a champion. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best elder law attorney in Philadelphia. My librarian skills, dormant for too long, sprang back to life. I spent my next 2 computer sessions not on financial websites, but on legal directories, review sites, and news archives. I cross-referenced names, read case histories, and looked for a lawyer with a reputation for being a shark, someone who not only understood the law but who hated bullies. I found her. Her name was Ms. Evelyn Reed. Her website described her as a fierce advocate for seniors' rights, and her client testimonials were filled with words like tenacious, brilliant, and unflinching. Her photo showed a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She was exactly what I needed. The next step was logistics. I couldn't very well call a high-powered attorney from the payphone in the hallway. I needed privacy, and I needed to pay her a retainer. I spoke to Maria, my trusted ally. "Maria," I said, taking her aside one afternoon, "I need to make a very important, very private business call. And I need to leave the facility for a few hours to meet with someone. Can you help me?" I explained that it concerned my family's handling of my finances. Seeing the quiet, steely resolve in my eyes, she didn't hesitate. She agreed to help me sign out for a doctor's appointment the following week, and even offered to drive me herself. Before the meeting, I prepared my case with the precision of a scholar preparing a dissertation. I used my computer time to log into my main bank account, the one Kevin controlled. I took meticulous, handwritten notes of every withdrawal, every transfer, every ATM cash out. I then cross-referenced these dates with the posts on Brenda's social media page, creating a damning timeline. October 5th, $5,000 transfer to a travel agency. October 7th, Brenda posts photos from a resort in Aruba. November 12th, $2,500 withdrawal from an ATM near a luxury car dealership. November 12th, Kevin posts a picture of his new sports car. It was a devastatingly clear picture of financial abuse. Finally, I printed out a full, detailed statement of my own secret brokerage account, a month-by-month record of my trades and my growing balance. This would be my proof of life, my evidence of a sound and capable mind. The day of the meeting, Maria drove me to a gleaming office building in Center City. I walked into Ms. Reed's office, my file of evidence tucked under my arm, and sat across the large mahogany desk from her. She looked at me, her expression professional but skeptical, likely expecting another sad story from a confused old woman. I didn't cry. I didn't complain. I simply laid out my case. I presented her with the timeline of my son's spending. I showed her the social media posts. And then I handed her the statement from my brokerage account. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is what I have been doing for the past 8 months while my son believed I was losing my cognitive abilities. It is a complete record of every trade I have made. I believe it serves as irrefutable proof that my mind is not only sound but quite profitable. Ms. Reed's eyebrows shot up as she scanned the pages. She looked at the starting balance, the list of transactions, and the final six-figure number at the bottom. The skepticism in her eyes vanished, replaced by a look of profound respect and then a slow, predatory smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. "Mrs. Washington," she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "This is not just a case. This is a masterpiece. They have committed financial elder abuse, fraud, and theft. Not only will we revoke the power of attorney and restore your assets, but I believe we have grounds for a criminal investigation." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Your son and his wife thought they were playing checkers. They have no idea you've been playing chess." She picked up her phone. "I'm filing an emergency petition with the court this afternoon. Let's go get your life back." The courtroom was a cold, imposing space, all dark wood and high ceilings, designed to make you feel small. But as I sat beside Ms. Reed at the plaintiff's table, I did not feel small. I felt powerful. I wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress I had ordered online and had delivered to Maria, a quiet statement of my reclaimed dignity. Across the aisle, Kevin and Brenda sat with their court-appointed lawyer, a young, overwhelmed man who looked like he was already regretting his career choice. My son and his wife looked pale and confused, their usual arrogance replaced by a dawning, terrified understanding that they had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had come to court expecting to finalize their control over a confused old woman. They were not prepared to face a formidable legal opponent and a mother who had become a financial titan in secret. The proceedings were swift and brutal. Kevin's lawyer tried to argue that I was confused and susceptible to undue influence, painting a picture of a woman who couldn't manage her own affairs. He presented the unpaid electric bill and the missed doctor's appointment as his primary evidence. Then it was Ms. Reed's turn. She rose, a picture of calm, lethal competence. "Your Honor," she began, "the defense would have you believe that my client, Mrs. Esther May Washington, is a woman in cognitive decline. They have used her grief as a pretext to seize her assets and fund their own lavish lifestyle." She then presented her evidence with the precision of a surgeon. First, she showed the bank statements, a relentless chronicle of my pension being drained, followed by an equally relentless slideshow of Brenda's social media posts. The vacation in Aruba, the new car, the designer clothes, all time-stamped to correspond with the withdrawals. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. "But the most compelling evidence of my client's state of mind," Ms. Reed continued, her voice rising, "is not what was taken from her but what she has built for herself." She submitted the certified, notarized statements from my brokerage account. "Your Honor, while her son and daughter-in-law were treating her pension as their personal slush fund, Mrs. Washington, with a small, forgotten account and the financial acumen taught to her by her late husband, was actively and brilliantly trading on the stock market. She has, in under a year, turned an initial stake of $22,000 into over $250,000. These are not the actions of a confused woman. These are the actions of a financial genius." She handed the documents to the judge, a stern older woman with intelligent eyes. The judge spent a long time examining the papers, her expression shifting from curiosity to astonishment and finally to a barely concealed admiration. She looked up from the documents over the top of her reading glasses and stared directly at Kevin and Brenda. The look she gave them could have frozen fire. "In all my years on this bench," the judge said, her voice ringing with an icy authority, "I have rarely seen a case of such blatant, shameless elder abuse. And I have never seen it perpetrated against a victim so clearly and demonstrably capable." He turned to me. "Mrs. Washington, I am profoundly sorry for what you have endured." Then her gaze snapped back to my son. "The power of attorney is hereby immediately and irrevocably revoked. All of Mrs. Washington's assets are to be restored to her sole control. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for a full criminal investigation into financial fraud and theft." Brenda let out a small, strangled sob. Kevin just sat there, his face the color of ash. Their world had crumbled to dust in the space of 20 minutes. I walked out of that courthouse and into the bright sunlight, a free woman. But my work wasn't finished. The first thing I did was leave the Golden Years facility, checking into a luxurious suite at the Rittenhouse Hotel. The second thing I did was instruct Ms. Reed to begin a new audacious negotiation. 2 months later, I stood in the dreary lobby of the Golden Years Care Facility, not as a resident but as its new owner. With a small fraction of my new fortune, I had bought the facility outright from its neglectful parent company. My first act was to fire the cruel administrator, Mr. Henderson. My second was to promote Maria to the position of facility manager, with a salary that reflected her worth. Over the next few months, we transformed the place. We painted the walls in warm, cheerful colors. We brought in comfortable new furniture, hired a chef to create nutritious, delicious meals, and planted a beautiful garden in the place of the gravel parking lot. We doubled the staff and their pay, ensuring that every resident was treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. My final act was to stand at the entrance as a new sign was unveiled. The sad, ironic name Golden Years was gone. In its place, in elegant carved letters, were the words, "The Samuel Washington House for Dignified Living." It was a tribute to the man who had taught me everything, a testament to the power of knowledge, and a final glorious dividend from a life of shared love. I had not just reclaimed my life, I had created a legacy, proving my husband's favorite saying one last time, "They can never, ever take what's in your head." That is the only real vault.